Hello, how you doing? Welcome to the 7th episode of Haverin. In this episode I'm speaking to Leyla Josephine about her fringe show Daddy Drag, which you can catch at Summer Hall. We had a really good conversation. We spoke about her previous work and some of the kind of themes that run through her poetry and her theatre. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you.
Okay, Leyla, thanks for coming on the podcast.
No worries, thanks for having me.
How's it going? How you doing?
Good. I'm tired today, but I'm happy.
Yeah, so how many days has it been so far?
6 maybe?
Yeah.
So on the 7th, looking forward to a day off. But it's gone really well so far. I've been really chuffed with audiences and stuff, so pretty
Nice
pleased.
one, cool. And so yeah, maybe I thought we could start with you and your work up to date. I've seen that in an interview that you did before, you said that your work kind of sits on the margins between poetry, performance and storytelling. So rather than be like, when was the first time you knew you were a poet, when was the first time you kind of felt the power of storytelling?
Yeah, I feel like I've always just picked a topic and then figured out the best way to put that topic across, almost. I try and not limit myself. I think because I went to drama school, I kind of always came from a theatre background, but actually because I did contemporary theatre, it could fit in any kind of place. The spoken word stuff came super accidentally. I just been going through like a big grief and a big breakup, and there was loads of stuff, and I just had this like physical need to just like write it all down, and then that's how that came about. And then I was asked by Sam Small to come do In Deep, which is quite a well known spoken word night in Glasgow. So I did that, and then realised that this was a kind of an art form that was quite immediate. Like I could immediately write something and I could immediately perform it. Whereas with theatre, it's obviously you've got to get a venue, you've got to write it, you've got to rehearse it and all these things. But spoken word had that more like urgent kind of thing to it. So that's where that came from. And it's always just been like everything I've looked at, I've been like, okay, what's the best way to do this? What feels right for this? So that's why Hopeless was a spoken word show with storytelling and elements of like sound recordings and lots of family based stuff. And that's why Daddy Drag has become a drag show. And actually, I wrote loads of poetry for Daddy Drag and had to throw it all out because it was just really rubbish. Right. So it didn't capture the same kind of energy that I wanted to kind of break apart. So that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah, and it's an obvious connect. I don't know why I've never thought of. I think there's lots of people now that are kind of blending the lines between theatre and spoken word. Has that always been the case, or is that something that you think is kind of new, that's starting to happen now?
I'm not sure. I think people are constantly always debating like what's poetry, what's spoken word, what's theatre. And you know, I don't have any answers for it, but I don't feel like any boundaries are really like useful because some shows rhyme, some shows don't rhyme, sometimes shows that rhyme are awful and sometimes shows that don't rhyme are awful and all this kind of stuff. And I just think any sort of expression always has its like pluses and negatives. But I think I think there's been more spoken word nights, which make me think that there has been more spoken word shows maybe in the last 10 years or something. Or that's how it's been marketed almost, or that's the starting point, and then it's developed, you know, it started with the poems and then it's developed into something else. So I think that's more current. But I don't know if it's something that's not been around for a long time, because you get all the like folk stories and like Irish songs and all. It's all very similar, and it's very similar to music as well. And people ask me all the time, and I don't really have an answer.
But what about you personally? What's your kind of starting point? Do you usually start with the poetry and that kind of works its way into a piece of theatre, or can it be different?
So it's been different for it's when I first started doing it. I was doing my graduation show, which was called What a Fanny. It was all about being a bad feminist. And
what's a bad feminist?
A bad feminist is someone that, you know, is quite girly and, you know, all these things that I've obviously realised that, you know, now there's been so much more chat about feminism that it can all exist at the same time. But when I was exploring it, it was new for me, and it was also didn't feel as current for, I mean, that was like 7 or 8 years ago now, so a long time. But that was always like I had to make a show. I had to make a theatre show, a graduation show, and I wrote poems for the show. Whereas Hopeless started with the poems and then the show created around it. And then Daddy Drag obviously started with the poems, and then the poems I had to get rid of. So it always changes totally. And then I've got, obviously, I do a lot of spoken word nights, and they, and all the poems, all the different topics will never exist in a show.
Yeah. And with regards to themes, something I really liked that I thought was quite powerful in your TED Talk is when you talk about shame as being a prominent theme in your work, and that like through talking about things, you can, I think you say, dilute the shame for other people. Could you speak about that and about maybe some of the other themes that run throughout your work?
Totally. I think shame has always been something that I've wanted to work with, maybe because I felt a lot of it myself. And I do believe that, you know, it gets less every time you like discuss it, and every time you kind of chat to other people and you have that shared connection. And I think Scotland in general, and being a woman as well, we're taught a lot about not to say everything, and, you know, to like hold quite a lot of stuff back. And I think I was always trying to like kind of resist that a little bit. In my family, there was always kind of things that were unsaid that kind of negatively affected me growing up, and actually I think that I've always wanted to make a kind of resistance to that, and I've always wanted to use my voice, and sometimes I've gone too far the other way and said too much. And it's always that kind of balance. But yeah, I think shame was always really important. I think political stances have always been important to me. You know, Hopeless was a lot about, you know, trying to fire people up a little bit more to take more control over, you know, policies, and, you know, making a difference to their community and stuff like that. So I think that runs through it, this political side, but also this like really sincerely family orientated and personal orientated like discovery as well. And sometimes they meet, and sometimes they just exist on their own.
And another thing you mentioned in that TED Talk is, you know, you say the magic of storytelling. And stories can be magical or powerful depending on whether they're true or not true. You can have fiction and non-fiction.
Totally.
But it definitely seems that direct lived experience is something that's quite important to the work that you do.
Totally. I mean, potentially now, I'm wondering, as my life gets a little bit more stable, whether I'm going to have to borrow other people's stories. And I've definitely noticed more and more in my work it is less confessional. I hate the word confessional. I think anyone that uses the word confessional is awful. But yeah, I do think that I've always came from a place of like this feeling of like urgency of like needing to say it, and that's usually because it's a personal thing. But yeah, it's funny like moving into more storytelling, or like I'm doing quite a lot of like screenwriting at the moment, which is obviously quite fictional, and actually you always borrow from your own life anyway. You always borrow from your own experiences. So I think all stories that are written from a place of personal experience, and the directness was something that happened at the start, but I'm wondering if I'm going to do that less and less now. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that as things become more stable, it almost becomes more difficult.
Yeah, totally. When you're like really happy in your life, you suddenly
I'm glad
run
to hear
out of
this.
things to talk about. Totally. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I can make any more shows about my dad, so I'll need to come up with something else. But yeah, I wonder, I'm quite interested. I've seen quite a lot of work that's kind of like investigatory, like recently. Like I saw Shit Theatre last night, and they did a show about going to Malta and meeting loads of expats, and they kind of tied it into like the EU and stuff like that. So I think that's quite interesting. I'd be quite intrigued to go find out more about something and then make a show about it. I think that would be quite cool, and use the skills that I've got to do it. I do think there's like a really important place for really direct personal work. I want to go back to that thing where I said about being confessional, because it's been really like on my mind recently, is that confessional kind of relates to like this idea of like confessing something that's shameful. It's like you know, it comes from like the church. If you're confessing something, it's something that you've done wrong or whatever. And I think a lot of the time women, they'll say, oh, it's a confessional piece of theatre, it's a confessional piece of work, which makes them feel like it's something that shouldn't be said, that isn't normally said. And it actually takes away from the craft that the person, the artist, has made to make this work, you know, that it doesn't consider that it's been really carefully planned to say certain things so that it has an effect on the audience, whereas you'd never say a piece of work by a man would be, or a straight man anyway, that would be confessional. And I think I've been really like toying with that thing, and a lot of reviewers will also always say that my work feels like therapy, or it must be therapy, it must be like all these things in it, and I feel like that's a really difficult thing to carry, because it almost feels like you're demeaning the work by saying it's just like a diary entry, when actually it's way more considered and crafted in order for audiences to feel certain things at certain points. So that's kind of why I'm against I mean, I know I said it, you didn't say it, but it's definitely something that's been floating around in my mind at the moment.
Oh, for sure.
And that wasn't the answer to your question. Sorry.
Can't actually remember what it was that I was asking.
Something about being direct in your work.
Direct personal experience. I know you do other stuff as well, don't you? Other stuff that, you know, like you work with. Do you do stuff in prisons as well?
Yeah, I've done stuff in prisons. So just work in different social contexts. So prisons, schools, adults with learning difficulties, things like that. I do these crazy conferences for people sometimes. I do lots of sort of workshops, and that feels very much part of the job. Like I think a lot of people see their art as the main thing, and then their workshops the side thing that, you know, pays the rent or whatever. But I really try and put as much work into the workshops and the facilitation as I do into my own work, because I love like finding my voice. So cringy. Was really important for my development, and actually I like to be able to help people have tools to do it themselves. You know, I don't teach them to do it because they've already got it. I like try and facilitate them or give them a space to be able to like voice their opinions and stuff. So I just did like a 6 week workshops, like 6 schools over 6 weeks, to do like this spoken word thing. So it was really, really intense. A lot of schools like just don't have the infrastructure to like help these projects kind of take off, and then some schools are just like unbelievably amazing, so really mixed results. But
I was going to say, how is it received by the students themselves?
I mean, like ups and downs. Like some really, really love it, some don't. What I noticed that if the teachers are involved in it, the pupils are more likely to be involved in it, and like the stability of what kind of class they're in. Like some of them are like, you know, because of time restraints and stuff, they have like substitute teachers or like whatever, and those guys are like can't really focus, or you only have an hour, so there's only so much you can do, and you know, all these things as well. But I still think it is really important. It just like sometimes it just doesn't work out exactly the way you want it to.
Sure.
And sometimes it's even better.
So coming specifically to Daddy Drag, your show at the Fringe, why don't you just introduce it in your own words and tell us and people watching this a little bit about it.
Yeah, so Daddy Drag is a drag king show with me playing a kind of dad character. My mum narrates it, and we speak about my own father throughout it. It's pretty fun to perform. It's a bit silly. It's at Summer Hall. It's kind of a new exploration for me, obviously not doing spoken word, apart from a very long, difficult, strenuous dad rap that I do at the start, which you were there on Saturday, right?
Yeah, I was there.
Went quite well on Saturday actually, but all the other times I'm like pure wheezing, but it kind of works with the character.
No, I forgot to say as well how much I enjoyed it.
Thanks.
It was a lot of fun, and also moving at points as well.
Thanks.
So yeah, are you watching lots of drag in order to like get in the zone for it? Because I've never seen drag done the reverse way. You know, everybody thinks of drag as the stereotypical way you would think of drag.
Going to femme,
for sure.
Yeah. So I worked with an artist called Annabelle Cooper, who is a drag king, who is one half of Oasis. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they're like a King Biff is the other one in it, Kirsty. They do this kind of like double act where they play the Oasis brothers, and they do like cabaret nights and stuff. It's like hilarious. But Annabelle came in and workshopped with me because obviously I'd never done drag before, and she'd worked with this really well-known drag king, Diane Torr, who's was a Scottish woman. She's sadly passed away now. So it was really nice to, you know, have someone that has lots of experience of drag to do it. And I think there's only like 3 or 4 shows at the Edinburgh Fringe that do have actually drag kings, which is crazy, really, because it's so much in the other way as well.
Sure.
But potentially it's not got the same amount of, you know, publicity as like the other way around, which is quite interesting. But it's definitely fun, and you know, I had to learn a lot about myself in it, and actually feeling like super ashamed of being like kind of masculine and ugly and disgusting and rude and misogynistic and all these things that I needed to become in order to become my father, but like subtly. And you know, when I was going through it, like I really didn't want to go to the when I was going through the workshops, I really didn't want to go for lunch like with my beard on. I didn't want to like, I just felt really uncomfortable, and I hadn't realised how much I'd been relying on my feminine looks or my feminine like mannerisms and stuff. So I had a bit of an identity crisis for sure about, you know, becoming. And I did a cabaret night in Queer Theory. It's on at Nice and Sleazy's.
Okay.
It's really good fun. I did that on Valentine's Day just before my March show of Daddy Drag, and that was really nerve-wracking because it's obviously like it's a public audience. It's in a bar late night, so that was quite scary as well. But there's loads of people that you know, dress in drag, but it's just potentially not got the same thing here. I think down in London and Brighton and stuff, it's got more drag kings around.
No, for sure, and it's purely just ignorance on my part. It's just not something I'd seen much before. Does it go back? Did you look into the history of it? Is it something that's been done for like?
Only as much as I went back to Diane Torr and read her book, but I think it's been done for a long time. And I mean, you just look at, in lots of ways, like Peter Pan was always played by a woman and stuff like that. So was it? No, not Peter Pan. Prince Charming, I think, was always played by a woman, and pantomime and stuff like that. So I do think it has been done, and there's loads of like, you know, artists that potentially go come across as more masculine, like Peggy Shaw, who is like a old time, I think she's from New York, theatre maker, so I've seen her a few times, and she does quite a lot of playing around with she was in a group, what were they called? They were a theatre group, it was her and her girlfriend. The company escapes my mind, but they were doing that like 30-40 years ago, so I mean, it has been around for sure.
Yeah, I thought it would have been.
It's so much fun as well. Like, of course it is, you know.
Yeah. It looked like you were having fun. Interact, lots of audience interaction.
Totally. Well, you're allowed to do things that you maybe wouldn't be allowed to do as a girl, you know. Potentially not allowed to, you know, spread my legs when I'm sitting on the sofa, or manspreading, interrupting people, calling people hen, you know, all this kind of stuff that we kind of almost forgive a certain age of man of doing, I think, quite a lot.
I used to work in a pub, and there was a lot of that. I mean, like the female waitresses would just be like, oh, he's just this old sweet man.
It's weird that, you know, and I don't think that's the wrong way to act, but I also don't know if it's the right way to act either. And I suppose that's what I let the audience decide. And I think maybe Dad doesn't get a wee bit mean enough in the show. That would be my one critique of it. Maybe he's too fun, and I maybe need to critique that slightly, but like, you know, I hope that the audience critique it, you know.
Oh no, I think I mean, without, don't want to have any spoilers or anything, totally. But I mean, I think he gets his kind of, in terms of the audience perception of him, things start to crumble, change a little bit. Yeah, I
think what I wanted to make a show was, you know, about this kind of feeling of, you know, having real resentment for someone and real anger for someone, but at the same still just having to love them, and like how that sometimes you feel like you're betraying each emotion, you know, and I think that that's what family is totally. It's like you have these people that you've been forced in with that can be really difficult and don't live their lives the way that you want them to live, and how do you sit with that? Like, do you spend your life being raging at them, or do you try and find a way of like letting it all exist together? And like, some days I can let it all exist together, and sometimes I feel more angry, and sometimes I, you know, sweep it under the carpet, and I suppose that's what I wanted the show to do. I didn't want to ever give any easy answers, and not to give too much away, but like, I don't feel like there's ever a conclusion really of the show in any way.
No, for sure. I mean, you say that. I mean, about the difficulty of fitting a whole person into a show.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah, and it's something you also mentioned in that TED talk that I keep going back to, but about kind of situations and people and circumstances being complicated,
Yeah.
and they're not necessarily being like clear cut definitions between, you know, right and wrong. In fact, in the beginning of the show, you say to your mum, "There's no right and wrong answers," and I wasn't sure if that was kind of like a deliberate play on that or not.
It absolutely wasn't, but that makes total sense, eh? Yeah, totally.
Always reading more into it.
No, that's good. No, that's, yeah, it's so true as well. And you know, my mum is an amazing woman because she never shied away from how difficult things were with Dad, but she also never, you know, they were, even though they split up, they were always friends. Like, he was always in my life, and that like acceptance of the situation, you know, some people might say that was like weak, some people might say that it's like, you know, brave or whatever, but really it's just kind of that, this feeling of like it can all just exist at the same time, and it has to, you know.
Yeah, I think something that's really strong about the show as well is how kind of universal it is, because, you know, if you read something or somebody's making a show about their dad, you'd be like, oh yeah, like, is this just going to be,
there's so many,
you know, if people are saying, not just that, but also like you're saying, if people are describing it as confessional and stuff as well, like, you don't, it's what appealed to me about it is that you know, there was bits for everything. There's parts of it that he isn't at all like my dad, and then there's other things where I'm like, oh, okay, you can see, I'm sure lots of people will be able to see
what
parts
bits
of,
was like your dad.
Well, the Bob Dylan for one, like, for
Dylan.
sure, yeah.
Is he a planner?
He's not at all, actually.
Yeah.
Pretty much just the Bob Dylan.
Just the Bob Dylan. That sounds like a good dad. The best part of it.
Yeah, for sure. So did you, like, is it all your dad, or is there kind of like bits?
No, it doesn't feel like my dad. It was always kind of built as an archetype. It was always built as this dad that I wanted potentially, or this facade of dad maybe. But it's funny, like, people that come to see the show that knew him, they have a very different kind of idea of it. Like, my mum, she says that I'm so like him in my mannerisms. Like, I'm so like it. Like, I did a lot of, like, you won't be able to hear if you're listening, but like double chin, like looking at the audience, like winking, like clapping my hands and all that kind of stuff. And she's like, that's so like him. And you know, I've got the belly, that's very like him. And you know, the charm, I'm like holding the room and all that, that's very, very him. But you know, he wasn't Scottish, he didn't have a Scottish accent. Like, I never went fishing with him. Like, all these things that are maybe, you know, they're the archetype potentially. But the planning and all the, you know, there's little hints of it. But I definitely just I wanted it to feel like a drag show. Like, it was kind of like playing with this idea of like performance and lip syncing and bigness, and like, I suppose, like, it's celebrating. So when you dress up in drag, you know, you're celebrating something that you've been told to be ashamed of and to do with gender. So when you're going femme, you're accepting femininity. You know, as a male, you're trying to like make up hair, flamboyance, bigger. It's like the drag queens that you see, they don't look like women. They look like this kind of like huge archetype of a woman, right? So that's what Daddy in the performances, he's me accepting all these things that I've been told to be ashamed of, and that is mirroring the shame that I have about my own father. And like, all these kind of, I don't think any of them run quite parallel, but I hope they all kind of merge to build this world to then break down. And that was kind of the idea of the drag that came out of it. And obviously there's the drag clothes that I found in my father's, that was the big question mark on the show. Yeah, so that was part of it as well.
And the audience interaction is very drag-like as well.
Yeah,
you know, like
totally.
Coming in amongst the crowd. And
yeah.
How does that always go down? Because the night that I was there, it was brilliant.
Yeah,
the guy
Saturday
that came up and sat and had his beer. What did you say about the road, the big one?
Oh, the big one.
And you were told corpsing.
It was so funny though. I love when it takes me by surprise. It's not like that every night. That's probably been the best show. Saturday night audiences probably.
Yeah.
It's also a bit of a weird time, 5:45 for a big kind of boisterous drag show. But sometimes the shows are a little bit quieter, and I think that it's all about just being like, well, that's okay, that just is a different energy.
Sure.
So it's about being like, oh, so maybe the slower bits, so the silences will hit a bit harder tonight, and you know, like all that kind of stuff. So it's about just kind of accepting that no show's going to be the same, and but as you said, like the interaction is always like okay. I think they're always safe in Dad's hands, really. I hope so anyway.
Yeah. And it was nice to see you laughing up there, because I guess you're doing the show as Daddy Drag, so like he's allowed to laugh, he's allowed to like interact. It doesn't. And
people love when I break character. They really love it. It's like a nice surprise for them. And there's not always an opportunity to do it, but that was just like so funny when that guy said that. I was like, no. To probably explain, there's like a point where Dad like can't remember what he's saying, and he's you know how dads are always like, what's that thing, like trying to, and it's just like people usually say like the road or the M8 or they say like motorway, and this guy just goes, a big one. I was just like lost my head. It was so funny. But yeah, it's definitely great fun.
And you mentioned your mum there. I think I seen a tweet where you were like, I need some more people in because I don't want my family here, just my family.
It was like my mum, I don't know how it happened, but on Friday night it was like there was like 15 people in, and like 5 of them were my mum and her pals, and then like 2 was my boyfriend's parents, so it was just a bit like awkward, but it was still like a lot of fun. It was there was a lot of passes from Summer Hall and stuff, and so it was fine, but it is that kind of, you do get a bit worried that they're like, what are you doing with your life? But they're so supportive, so it's absolutely fine. So supportive.
Nice one. Is there anything you want to add?
No, don't think so. Please come.
Yeah, why don't you tell people like where it is?
Yeah, so it's 5:45 every day at Summer Hall, apart from the 12th and the 19th. We have BSL on the Saturday the 10th and 17th. And that's everything.
Cool.
Come.
Well, yeah, no, it's really good. And you'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll do the whole shebang.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.